What defines strategic leadership?
It's the balcony and the dance floor. And unfortunately, too many leaders get stuck on the dance floor and they don't spend enough time up in the balcony. Adaptive problems. Those are the problems that we don't know what to do. They're often wicked problems because they don't have a single solution. You can't really pull them apart. In order to generate solution, we need to collaborate. If people are going to engage with the strategy, they have to do this on an emotional level,
You spoke about two things that are important. One is what's the outcome, what's the future we are trying to create? And the second thing that you spoke about is what the practical path. What do I need to do?
Vision statements really are very poor at motivating people. Really what I'm talking about is an outcome that people can visualize, that people can see in their mind's eye. The value of SMART goals is that they provide some rigor to creating this visualization in people's mind. But I'm arguing that that strategy in today's organizations has to be much more diverse and diffused, decentralized, and aligned.
Hi, Ed. Such a pleasure having you here. Finally, you're here.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Pleasure is all mine. Trust me, pleasure is all mine. Thank you, Ed. And I'm super excited for our conversation for several reasons. One, of course, we'll be discussing leadership. And secondly, we'll be talking about a very important aspect of leadership, which is strategic leadership. And of course, very curious to understand the way you look at strategic, right? Because when the whole world is talking about strategic thinking, you talk about strategic doing. Just curious, you have written so much around strategic leadership. You have spoken about strategic leadership. In your view, what defines strategic leadership? What are the qualities of an effective strategic leader?
Well, let me share with you how a colleague of mine, Doug Smith, talks about it, and I think it's a very helpful way of thinking about it. It's the balcony and the dance floor. We've all been in a situation where we've been on a dance floor. We're involved with our activities. We're totally engaged with our partners, and we're fully active. That's important, but leadership comes also from going up in the balcony and seeing the patterns on the dance floor and starting to understand that we can actually guide the patterns on the dance floor through our own leadership behaviors, our skills as a leader. And leaders now have to have that capacity to go from the dance floor to the balcony, back to the dance floor, back and forth continuously. And unfortunately, too many leaders get stuck on the dance floor and they don't spend enough time up in the balcony, or they spend, when they do their strategic thinking, it's bucketed in a period of time for a month or 2 months or 3 months, whatever. But then they kind of forget to go back up then they go down to the dance floor, but they forget to go back up into the balcony every once in a while. So part of this is understanding that zooming in and zooming out are critical strategy skills that the leader has to be able to manage.
The first time when I heard about the dance in the balcony was when I was going through some work around adaptive leadership by Ronald Heifetz. He has done a lot of work in that space, right?
Exactly, and that's where it comes from, because increasingly he talks about the difference between technical and adaptive problems, and you can think of that as just the difference between a problem that we know what to do and a problem where we don't know what to do. We don't have a solution. And increasingly, of course, for a whole variety of reasons, including globalization, increasing the internet, increasing pace of technology development, climate change, pandemics, everything. Think about all of those different disruptors in our environment that we're confronting. And increasingly we have to address adaptive problems. Those are the problems that we don't know what to do. And so they're often wicked problems because they don't have a single, they don't have a single solution, and you can't really pull them apart very easily. You can't really pull them apart. And so they're complex in two ways. One is that that problem is complex. You can't pull it apart, but the complexity comes from the fact that we, in order to generate solutions or improve our situation, get better performance, whatever we're trying to do, we need to collaborate. We need to work with others. And so that in and of itself, a collaboration in and of itself, is a complex adaptive system, if you want to think about it that way. It's continuously moving and shifting, and our role as leaders has to be, how do I guide that system? How do I guide that collaboration to generate solutions? And of course, we don't know before the fact. We don't know what's going to work. We have no idea what's going to work. And so you have to develop this process of experimentation, continuous experimentation, and it changes the way in which we lead and manage organizations and networks.
Yeah, that was a quick masterclass on adaptive leadership, Ed, by the way, right? And I love it, the way you explain collaboration as adaptive, complex system. And unless we look at the different parts and how they are in sync with different parts, we'll not be able to understand the system. As my friend and a teacher, David Clatterbach, would mention, that we cannot handle all the challenges in the system from a linear perspective. So it's very important to look at a situation from a systemic perspective. Ed, when the world is talking about strategic planning, you advocate for strategic doing. In fact, you have written this beautiful book, Strategic Doing, 10 Skills for Agile Leadership. Just curious, if you can just help me understand, what do you mean by strategic doing and why it's important for us to understand?
So let's keep developing the conversation off of adaptive challenges. So in an adaptive challenge, we don't know what's going to work beforehand. Linear thinking doesn't work. The premise of strategic planning, which came out of operations management in World War II, is that we can identify a goal and we can linearly move toward that goal. It's just, it's a straight path that we can take toward that goal. And of course, strategic planning, as classical strategic planning, doesn't work very well. The strategic plans don't get implemented very well, if at all. And the environment is shifting so that you can't bucket your strategic thinking to a corporate retreat sometime in the summertime. The world's shifting much. You can't do it that way. So what's the alternative? Well, let's define what strategy is, first of all. Let's define that in a clear and concise way. And a strategy answers really three questions. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? But the first question is, what's our challenge? What are we trying to do? What's our purpose? So understanding a challenge, understanding our current challenge, where are we sitting? What's the challenge? Understanding where we want to go. What's the outcome? What's success look like? And understanding how we're going to get there. What's the path we're going to take? What's the projects we're going to implement to generate knowledge about this system that we don't know? We can't predict it. And so the whole process of strategic doing is actually doing work, running experiments, generating knowledge about what's working, what can't work, testing our hypotheses, continuously doing that, while we're doing that within the context of a strategy where we're saying, okay, well, we want to get out here. This is where we'd like to be. This is the outcome we'd like to have. But we really have, a straight path to this. We're going to try a bunch of experiments. And so that's the whole notion of strategic doing. You can't separate strategy and doing, because you have to do to generate information, knowledge, in order to figure out whether your strategy is going to work. So these things are not, typically developing a strategy and executing a strategy and strategic planning was separated.
Such a beautiful way of bringing strategic thinking and execution together. Ramcharan, in his book Execution, he said that any organization with A level of strategy with B grade of B level of execution are not going to deliver results. On the contrary, B grade of strategy with A level of execution will give you better results. Ed, while I was listening to you, you said could be a possibility that you might not be even aware of what's going to work. You use the word aware here. You did not use the word you would not know if it's going to work. Why did you choose this word aware here, especially when we are talking in the context of leadership, strategic doing? How would you define, how do you create a distinction between aware and knowing?
This gets into to me, it gets into the question of implicit versus explicit knowledge. Awareness, I mean, we know more than we can tell. This is the old phrase that you use to explain what implicit knowledge is, or strategic intuition, or however, but it's knowledge from experience. It's knowledge from experience. And we might be aware of something, but we don't really know it until we've actually run and tested our hypothesis, tested our idea. And so there's a big difference really between awareness and knowledge. And we have to continuously pull apart, in a sense, the assumptions that we're trying to, what has to go right for our strategy to work? What has to go right? And if we're assuming that this has to go right, well, we better, rather than assume it, we better test it and figure out what's our level of certainty around this. Do we really know that it's going to work, or do we not know and we better pretty fuzzy about it? We better test that, because if it's not going to work, then let's do a small experiment, figure that out. It's our risk, because so much of strategy now is really around managing risk.
Yeah, yeah. And probably that's the reason you spoke about that it's very important when we are dealing with challenges where the problem is not even known to experiment, look at what might not work. The more experiments we can have, the better the chances are to find a solution to a challenge that did not even exist. You also use the word strategic intuition, and now I can relate to when you use that in the context of awareness as against the knowing part of it.
We take advantage of strategic intuition in the strategic doing process, because you start to think about, okay, well, what are the things we could do to improve our performance or improve our results that we want to get to, create a better situation for ourselves, adapt more tightly to our environment. What do we need to do that? We don't really know what we need to do until we test out a hypothesis, but we have some intuition. Well, we think we have some ideas that, based on our experience, we have some guesses, really. And collective intuition, or collectively putting those out on the table, help us make choices around the different options that we have. And so at the end of the day, strategy is all about making choices.
Yeah. And I love it because I never looked at these two words coming together the way they came together in this conversation. Because for me, strategic is very head level, and intuition is where we are tapping into the wisdom that comes from our gut. And bringing these two together, it's like, wow.
Well, I think you have to recognize, I mean, if you think about your own personal choices, whether where you're going to go to school, what are you going to study, who is your life partner going to be, what religion do you want to practice? All of these are decisions that we have to make, or we tend to make, but we don't make them totally analytically. We go onto the college campus or the university campus and see how we feel. Yeah, it has a great engineering program, a great software development program. I'm interested in software development. But how do I feel on the campus? We make our life choices this way, where we combine our own intuition with some analysis. So,
I'm loving it because we are talking about something that might be labeled as a bit abstract or esoteric. in the context of leadership. And while we are discussing strategic doing, this is so beautiful. We also spoke about that at times people find it very difficult to implement those strategies. What do you think? What is, or what are the primary impediments that come in the way of an individual to implement those strategic plans, those strategies?
Well, let's go to the traditional approach, the traditional, more mechanistic approach of strategy, where essentially a small group of people at the top of the organization do the thinking to come up with a strategy, and then they create or they push those decisions down through the organization, and the people below do the doing. So there's a separation between thinking and doing. And if people are going to engage with the strategy, they have to do this on an emotional level, I mean, when you think about engagement and your commitment, you're engaged on an emotional level. And if people cannot visualize where we're going, what's the future, what's my role in that, why is what I'm doing today going to help the collective good? If they can't make that alignment, then they're not going to be motivated to do much. They'll just keep doing what they're doing. And so a strategy is really designed around trying to get the organization to adjust to new realities or new opportunities. And so it's constantly trying to manage this shift or change. But most people, they won't change unless they have two things that that leadership provides them with. One is a very clear understanding of what the outcome is that we're trying to get to. What's the future that we're trying to build together? And this is not really a vision statement. Vision statements really are very poor at motivating people. Really what I'm talking about is an outcome that people can visualize, that people can see in their mind's eye. And then the second thing they need is to execute a strategy is they need a practical path to move toward that outcome. So they need to know, what do they need to do? I've got to believe in this outcome. I've got to see it in my mind's eye and say, yeah, that's something I really want to be part of. That's what I want to do. It's an emotional engagement. And then second is I've got to have some practical steps that you need me to take to move toward that outcome. And managers, by and large, are miserable at doing this. They tend to implement very quantitative metrics that don't emotionally engage people. So the value of SMART goals, which are very important, SMART goals, is that they provide some rigor to creating this visualization in people's mind. But I'm arguing that that strategy in today's organizations has to be much more diverse and diffused, decentralized, and aligned. So it's not just, hey, we're going to just have everybody do their own thing. No, we're going to create strategic conversations, again, that answer these questions. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? We're going to create strategic conversations throughout the organization to create alignment toward the bigger purpose that we want.
In fact, that was the question that I wanted to explore deeper with you, because in your book as well, you have spoken about deep conversations. And another word that caught my attention was where you have accentuated a lot on network. I'll come to these two words called network and deep conversations in a while, Ed. Before that, you spoke about two things that are important. One is what's the outcome, what's the future we are trying to create? And the second thing that you spoke about is what the practical part. What do I need to do? Now, while you were talking about these two, one of the common threads that you spoke about is the emotionally engaging. What role can a leader play in engaging their team members emotionally? Because once that is taken care of, the other two pillars would stand on that part, right?
The interesting dimension of, we're dealing in a knowledge economy, and we're which changes the way in which organizations operate. Okay, so we've known this for some time, but the power tool that managers have is conversation. And the reason I say that is because it's through conversations that we create and we distribute our knowledge. We create and distribute knowledge through conversation largely. And so learning how to design and guide strategic conversations, which is the 10 skills of strategic doing, learning how to design and guide those conversations in such a way that you're engaging in a deeper conversation and you're understanding how the overall outcome the organization is trying to get to can be translated throughout the organization in such a way that everyone in the organization sees how they can contribute to an outcome that's aligned with the larger outcome of the corporation. So alignment becomes critically important, and you do that alignment through a conversation. Now, the paradox of all this is that people say, oh, well, deep conversations, that's going to take a lot of time, blah, blah, blah. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. If you understand the rules of strategic conversation, if you understand those skills, if you master these skills, you can have a strategic conversation very, very quickly. When I was at Purdue University, I was trying to figure out how Purdue University could collaborate with one of the Fraunhofer Institutes in Stuttgart, Germany. And so Fraunhofer is a very difficult corporation. It's not a corporation, it's a network of institutes, really. It's very difficult for outsiders to penetrate. It's hard to figure out where people are, but they are global. They're world leaders in applied research. So you want to know how they're thinking about things when you're seeing how you can improve and how you might be able to partner. So Purdue asked me to start thinking about how could we partner with Fraunhofer. Well, Fraunhofer gave me about an hour meeting, about an hour and a half meeting. And so I flew over to Stuttgart for this meeting. And I ran the meeting by asking questions. And I spent about 30% of the time trying to explore what could we do that would benefit you and would benefit me, benefit Purdue. What could we do together? And then I spent about 40% of the time on what should we do? Of all the things we could do, we've got to pick, what should we do? And then I spent about 20% of the time on what will we do? How are we going to move toward this outcome that we've defined? We want to pick one of these opportunities. We want to move toward this outcome. Now, what's a project we could do? How could we do that? And then I spent about 10% of my time saying, well, when are we getting back together again? Because we're just coming up with the first version of these ideas. And, it's not going to be perfect. It's good enough to start. So when are we coming back together again? So should I come back over here in June, or would you like to come back to Purdue or whatever? When I guided that conversation with these questions, I came out with all of the elements I needed for a strategic action plan. I knew exactly what assets Fraunhofer had. They knew what assets we had. We knew what opportunities we had. We ranked these opportunities very quickly, came up with a, kind of a triage. Here are the high probability ones that look pretty good. Here's some that we could maybe do. Here's ones that, they're going to be tough to do. So let's put those on the bottom. And then we came up with a project. We came up with a couple of projects, and we said, okay, well, now we'll start working on this. So you can design, if you understand the structure of these strategic conversations, if you understand the structure of the conversation that leads to a collaboration, if you understand that structure, you can form collaborations very quickly. And this is the key, I'd say, the key insight of strategic doing, which is that complex collaborations where we come together and manage a process of recombinant innovation, come up with assets and recombine them to create shared value, new shared value. That process of recombination is what collaboration is. Stable collaborations or productive collaborations emerge from conversations with a very predictable structure. So if you understand what the structure is, you can do it very quickly.
Yeah. And I'm sure the way you explained the stable and the productive collaborations and the complex structure, the way you explained it, it's not as easy as that. But I'm sure now I know what you meant when you said conversations can create and distribute our knowledge. Let me just go back to another statement that you made, Ed, where you mentioned that strategic doing has to be decentralized and aligned. I do understand when you're talking about alignment. When it comes to decentralized, one of the things that I personally feel might come in the way of the need for our leaders to control the things, because if it's decentralized, the control is going in the hands of the other people that they might not be comfortable with. In that situation, how do you deal with that leader who's very fearful of allowing the control to move out of their hand?
Well, this is the biggest challenge, I think, for organizations is overcoming fear. If you climb the corporate ladder and you have, because you have a set of behaviors that actually work on control and work off of power, increasing levels of power, this feels threatening to you. This feels threatening to you, and you will try to undercut it. The problem with that, of course, is that while you may maintain your position, you're doing great damage to the corporation. You're doing great damage because you're slowing the process of the organization's capacity to adapt. The capacity to adapt is embedded in all the people who are in the corporation. And what you as a leader are trying to do is move that corporation in a way that's very similar to a purposeful flock of birds. So a flock of birds moves toward an outcome or moves together by following some simple rules. So what strategic doing does is that you can now distribute the strategic conversations throughout your whole organization, and you can maintain alignment throughout your organization. Now, here's the payoff of doing that. Here's the payoff. The payoff is huge improvements in productivity. That's what the payoff is. And I'm not talking about 10% improvement, 5% improvement, 15%. I'm talking about 2x, 5x, 10x improvements in productivity. Why is that? Because people bring their full selves into implementing the strategy. So you have to do strategy differently. And as you do that, you create these bonds of linking and leveraging and aligning assets within the organization. And when I talk about assets, I'm talking about not only, obviously, we think about physical assets and financial assets, but we're in a knowledge economy. The real assets are the 6 inches between everybody's ears.
Yeah.
Brain power. It's their brain power. And so when you start linking, leveraging, and aligning brain power and the networks that people have. So let me give you an example of this. When I first was working on this in the 90s, the first project I ever worked on, I said to the leadership group, we had six members in the leadership group. I said, what we're doing is not coming up with a strategy for the 6 of you to broadcast. What we're doing is we're linking, leveraging, and aligning across our networks. So each one of you easily has 100 people in your network that you could convince to work with you if they saw how their life would be better by doing that. They'd have more fun, they'd have a deeper sense of purpose, whatever. I mean, financially better off. If they understood that, there's easily 100 in your network. And so we're not talking about the strategy for the 6 people in this room. We're talking about linking, leveraging, aligning 600 people. And so it's a network thinking that is different from the mechanistic thinking that we grew up with in traditional management. So adaptive management is thinking much more horizontally than vertically. Of course, you do have vertical relationships. You still have them. They're important. There's no doubt about that. But in order to gain major improvements in productivity, we need to be able to manage horizontally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Don't know how to do that. I mean, most people don't know how to do that. And so what we wrote the book about was to say, look, the first thing is recognize what your power tool is. Your power tool is conversation, how you design and guide it. And you design and guide it with questions primarily. But here are 10 skills that you can practice and you can master. Now, the good news is that you can be pretty good at all 10 of them. The bad news is you can't be, nobody is good at all 10 of them. Nobody's equally good at all 10. And so this is one of the main reasons why a cognitively diverse team, group of people who think differently, is critically important and especially performs better when we address complex challenges.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for bringing that. And I'm so much in alignment to what you're speaking about, because on one hand, you spoke about how it's so very important to have emotionally engaging conversations, the alignment and the collaboration. And then you spoke about the importance of linking, leveraging, and aligning. Now, coming back to the term network. Now, can you please help me understand when you are using the term network, where you could bring in, as you use the word linking, leveraging, and aligning, network in an organization, right? Because you might have a network of 100 people within the organization. Can you just throw more light on that so that we can understand it?
Okay, so the best way that I've found to explain this is to distinguish between three types of networks. The first is what I'll call an advocacy network. So all the, I don't know what your favorite sports team is, but let's just say, I'll say mine is the Boston Red Sox, okay, in baseball. You may have a cricket favorite team, or a soccer team, ball team. Well, all of the fans of the Boston Red Sox are in a network. They all love the Boston Red Sox, and they all are cheering for the Boston Red Sox. So they're all advocating for the best interests of the Boston Red Sox. You are part of many, many different advocacy networks. Your neighborhood, perhaps your school, whole range of organizations, even professional organizations you may be part of, whatever. With these advocacy networks, we all share a purpose, but we don't know each other. Now, let's go to the next step, which is a learning network. And these are mostly good examples of learning networks are professional associations. So associations, professional engineers, for example, or mechanical engineer societies. Now, we know each other because we are all members of this organization, and we want to help each other learn. But we're advancing our own interests. We're not sharing a purpose. We're beyond learning, beyond helping each other learn. But I'm going in one direction and you're going in another direction, and I'm willing to help you because you're willing to help me. And so this is a learning network, also called a community of practice, often called a community. The third is what we need to develop, which is an innovating network. Here, there is a disciplined process of collaboration. Here, we are creating value. We're creating something entirely new from the assets we already have at hand. We already have the assets. We don't necessarily know what the assets are because we haven't revealed them to each other, but we have assets in our networks, and we're combining them in a new and different way and creating shared value. And in that case, this is a process of recombinant innovation, and it's an innovating network. And that's really what our organizations have to get our leaders have to get really, really good at, is learning how to form these innovating networks quickly, because these innovating networks are a process of innovation among equal partners. So your positional authority doesn't matter. You may be president, but in an innovating network, you're Joe, or you're Bill, or you're Jane, or why? Because we're all working together to create a solution to this complex problem that we don't know the answer to. So we have to innovate. We have to come up with something new. And so what strategic doing does is it cracks the nut. It explains how. How do you do this? And so strategic doing creates the operating system for creating networks. And as you get better at these skills, as you learn them and practice them, it's just like learning an instrument. It's like one of the reasons I think Yo-Yo Ma wrote the book Forward is that when he experienced what we were doing, he understood it as a discipline. And he, of all people, who is a, world-class cellist, right, understands the power of discipline, the power of discipline.
Yeah. I could so much relate to the advocacy network that you spoke about, the learning network. Of course, we are a part of different coaching associations. We are a part of, Rotary Club and then the Lions Clubs of the world, the different masterminds in the community of practices that we are a part of. And the innovation network that you spoke about landed so well because, and that is possible only when a leader is willing to challenge the status quo one is operating from, when they are willing to revisit the roles and the responsibilities they've been identifying themselves with. And unless they are willing to evolve the identities that they've been operating from, they would not be able to question the assumptions that they operate from and come up with something which is bigger than what either one of them could create. In several organizations, Ed, um, companies would tell you that, hey, we would want this person to have strategic thinking. We would want him or we would want her to have more strategic thinking. Now, here's the question. Can strategic thinking or strategic mindset be developed? If yes, how?
I think we all have inherent in among us as human beings, we all have the capacity to both add value to the world, do things that are valuable, and also step in the balcony and choose a direction. Now, not everybody does that. They, obviously, humans are very complex, and not everybody makes those kinds of choices. But I believe virtually everybody, is capable of doing that. And so within some constraints that we have to have within the organization, we have to be able to explore what are the gifts that everybody has? What could they contribute to the value of the organization, where we're going? But when you do this effectively, as I said, the payoff is dramatically improved productivity. The payoff is deeper engagement with people, and the payoff is faster adaptation. You learn faster as a group. You're going to learn faster. You're going to spot opportunities faster. You're going to align your assets faster. You're going to experiment faster. You're going to move faster. And in a world in which the environment is shifting quite dramatically, very quickly, that's a huge competitive advantage.
Thank you. I think that could be a good starting point, Ed, that for the time being, can I go back to the balcony and look at what's happening at the dance floor, identify the patterns that you spoke about. And there are few very basic questions that you have planted in this conversation when you said, what's the outcome that we are trying to create? What is the future that we are trying to create? And what are the practical pathways and what should I be doing to reach there? And the centralized and the decentralized and the alignment part that you spoke about. And I think one theme that I've been able to pick up is having engaging deep conversations, because once we have engaging deep conversations, it can help us to have that, the strategic bent of mind that will help us, that will push us towards creating something which is more result oriented.
There's simple skills that we've laid out. They're simple skills, but they're not easy skills in the sense that they require practice. And just like mastery comes with practice, just in any discipline, mastery comes with practice. So, and you can practice in a variety of different contexts. I mean, we've had people do strategic doing on birthday parties. How do I design a birthday party that's inclusive and fun and different? Well, I've never done that before. So, or how do I design a vacation? Well, these are complex problems. They're somewhat adaptive problems, and you can practice in a group. You can practice these skills. But the most important point is that these skills can be learned and mastered by anyone. So we teach these skills to high school students. We teach them to even grade school students. And why is that? It's because the next generation of leaders current generation and next generation are going to be facing really complex challenges.
And thank you so much for contributing to this complete space of leadership, because there's so much written on leadership. And I think when I read this book called Strategic Doing, 10 Skills for Agile Leadership, for me, it was a fresh whiff of air. And it allowed me to create a very clear-cut demarcation and distinction between strategic thinking that might not deliver results and strategic doing. If only I could master simple and yet not so easy to implement agile skills for agile leadership, I think I'll be able to be a little bit better leader. Ed, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity for the conversation. It was a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to having you again, because I'm sure we can dig deeper into those 10 skills as well.
Perfect. Great.